He was robbing $65 billion and never had a gun in his hand, never broke into a vault, never ran from the police. He has just called his phone, smiled and said, "Trust me." 40 years had no one challenged it. This is what happened to Bernie Madoff, the father of the greatest cheat in the financial history. And the darkest part, he did not rob passers-by. He robbed those who were fond of him. Laurelton, Queens, 1938, an industrial area of Jewish community where no one was a stranger to another, where your word was your reputation and your reputation was all. Bernie Madoff has been raised knowing that, watching his neighbors, watching how trust worked, the ways people leaned upon each other. His mother, Sylvia, had made the attempt to operate a brokerage shop right out of the house. It failed. The SEC shut it down. Young Bernie was in that house, and he had watched his mom dream being buried under the paperwork and regulators. He didn't learn, "Don't do this." He learned, "Don't get caught." By the time he was 22, Bernie had scraped together $5,000 working as a lifeguard and installing garden sprinklers. Not glamorous, not exciting, just grinding, saving, waiting. To most 22-year-olds, $5,000 is a vacation. To Bernie, it was a foundation. He opened Bernie Madoff Investment Securities in 1960, out of a tiny office with no reputation, no connections, and no safety net, just ambition and a telephone. But Wall Street didn't care about ambition. Wall Street cared about pedigree. The big firms, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, they traded on the New York Stock Exchange floor. That was the inner circle. You needed the right school, the right family, the right handshake. Bernie had none of it. He was a kid from Queens in a world built for old money. They didn't let him in, so he stopped trying to get in. He built something they hadn't thought of yet. While the big boys were still doing everything by hand on a noisy trading floor, Bernie was using computers. Early, clunky, slow computers. But computers, he could execute trades faster, cheaper, and cleaner than anyone on that floor. Clients started noticing. Orders started flowing. "Bernie, can you handle this? Bernie, can you do that?" "Yes. Always yes. Whatever you need. I don't understand why you're so much faster than everyone else," one client told him. "Because they're still doing it the old way," Bernie said. "And I'm not. Simple as that." He wasn't just a trader. He was a builder. He helped develop the systems that would eventually become NASDAQ, one of the largest stock exchanges in the world. Regulators respected him. Competitors admired him. He served on industry boards. He gave speeches. He shook hands with the people whose job it was to catch people like him. And they smiled back every single time. Because Bernie Madoff wasn't a con man pretending to be a genius. He was a genius who decided one day that pretending was easier than performing. By the 1970s, Bernie had a second business running quietly alongside the legitimate one, a wealth management operation. Friends first, then family friends, then friends of friends. He'd take their money, invest it, and send them steady returns. 10%, 12%, every single year. Rain or shine, bull market, bear market, didn't matter. Bernie's clients always made money. "Bernie, the whole market is down 30% this year. How are you up 11? "Smart positioning," he'd say. "Sophisticated hedging strategy. Very technical. Very complex. You wouldn't understand the mechanics, but the results speak for themselves." And people nodded. Because they were making money, because this was Bernie Madoff, and Bernie Madoff didn't lie. Nobody asked to see the actual trades. Nobody demanded a third-party audit. Nobody asked the obvious question that Harry Markopolos would eventually scream into the void for 9 straight years. When everyone else loses, how does one man always win? Here's the thing nobody tells you about Ponzi schemes. They don't begin with a master plan. They begin with one desperate moment. Somewhere around the early 90s, maybe earlier, Bernie hit a wall. The markets moved in a direction his strategy couldn't follow. The returns he'd promised weren't coming. He had 2 choices: tell the truth and watch everything collapse, or buy himself one more quarter. Just one. Just enough time to recover and fix it properly. He paid his old investors using money from new investors. Nobody noticed. The statement still looked perfect. Next quarter, same problem, same solution. Then the next, and the next. One bad quarter turned into a decade. A decade turned into 4 decades. The longest financial lie ever told. And it started with a man just trying to buy himself a little more time. The operation itself was almost laughably simple. Bernie ran it from a separate floor in the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan. Locked floor. Trusted employees only. Frank DePascali, his right-hand man, ran the day-to-day. No fancy algorithms, no real trades, just Frank and a small team manually typing fake confirmations. Fake stocks, fake prices. Fake execution dates pulled from old newspapers so the history looked real. Real letterhead, real envelopes, real signatures. Thousands of statements mailed out every single month showing beautiful, consistent returns to people who had no idea none of it existed. Clients never questioned it because the statements felt real. Because you don't audit someone you trust. You just open the envelope, see the number, feel relieved, and go back to your life. And who were these clients? Not just the wealthy, not just the greedy. Bernie targeted his own community. Jewish country clubs in Palm Beach, synagogue networks, charitable foundations. He understood affinity. He understood that people trust people who look like them, pray like them, grew up like them. He's one of us, they said. He would never do this to us. The Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, wiped out. $15 million, gone. A man who survived the Holocaust, who spent his life rebuilding, who trusted Bernie with everything, gone. Yeshiva University, gone. Thousands of ordinary families, retired teachers, veterans, couples who had saved for 40 years and handed it all to Bernie because a friend told a friend told a friend that this man was safe. The trust he destroyed wasn't just financial. It was something older than money. Something that doesn't have a price and can't be paid back in restitution checks. For 4 decades, nobody caught him. Not because they weren't warned. Harry Markopolos, a financial analyst from Boston, figured it out in 4 hours. 4 hours! He sat down with Bernie's numbers in 1990, and within the same afternoon he knew the returns were mathematically impossible. No strategy produces these results in these conditions consistently over this many years. It doesn't exist. He wrote it all down, every calculation, every red flag, every proof, and he sent it to the SEC. They didn't call back. He sent another report, then another. 5 submissions over 9 years. 2 formal investigations. The SEC met with Bernie directly. Bernie was calm, confident, articulate. He answered every question. He offered explanations that sounded technical enough to satisfy people who didn't want to dig deeper. The investigator shook his hand and left. Harry Markopolos went home and bought a gun. Not for Bernie, for himself, because he was terrified. He knew what Bernie was running. He knew how deep it went, and the people who were supposed to stop it had just smiled and walked away. He thought they might come for him next. The empire didn't fall because of Markopolos. It didn't fall because of the SEC. It fell because of gravity. In 2008, the financial crisis hit. Markets collapsed. Panic everywhere. And Bernie's clients, all of them, needed their money back at the same time. $7 billion in withdrawal requests came in within weeks. Bernie had $200 million left in the account. The gap was unsurvivable. The math was finally done. On December 10, 2008, Bernie Madoff called his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, into his apartment. He sat them down. He looked at them. And for the first time in 40 years, he told the truth. "It's all one big lie," he said. "There is no investment strategy. There are no trades. There is no money. There never was." His sons sat there in silence. Then they stood up, walked out, and called the FBI. They never spoke to their father again. The next morning, federal agents arrived at Bernie's penthouse. They knocked. He answered. "Are you sure there's no innocent explanation for any of this?" they asked. "No," Bernie said. "There is no innocent explanation." He had been rehearsing that sentence his entire life without knowing it. They took everything. The Manhattan penthouse, the Montauk Beach house, the Palm Beach mansion, the French villa, the 55-foot fishing boat named Bull, Ruth's jewelry, the cars, the furniture. Liquidated and distributed. It barely touched the surface of what was owed. Bernie was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. He was 71 years old. The judge knew he would never serve a fraction of it. That wasn't the point. The number was a message. It was the court saying out loud what the victims already knew. What you did cannot be measured in years. His son, Mark, hanged himself on the 2nd anniversary of Bernie's arrest. His son Andrew died of cancer in 2014, his family publicly blaming the stress of the scandal for accelerating his illness. His wife Ruth ended up essentially alone, publicly shamed, cut off from the life she had lived for decades. Bernie died in federal prison in April 2021. He was 82. His last years were spent filing appeals. giving occasional interviews, still quietly suggesting the banks must have known, still casting himself as a man caught in circumstances larger than himself. But the people he destroyed don't get interviews. Burt Ross, former mayor of Fort Lee in New Jersey, lost $5 million, his entire life savings. Gone at 65, a retired couple in Florida had been clients since the 1960s. 40 years of statements. They died believing they were millionaires. Their children inherited nothing. A woman named Helen Chapman represented hundreds of victims and said the same thing over and over. These were not greedy people chasing impossible returns. These were careful people who thought they were being responsible. Bernie Madoff didn't invent greed. He invented safety. He sold the feeling that someone steady and brilliant and trustworthy was watching over your money so you didn't have to worry. In a world that feels chaotic and terrifying, he offered certainty. And people paid him everything they had for it. Harry Markopolos said it best. The SEC was looking for criminals in the gutter. Bernie was wearing a tuxedo at the charity gala. He wasn't hiding, he was hosting. That is what you can never forget. He was not working behind the scenes. He was at the dinner table. He was giving the speech. He was accepting the award. The regulators who were meant to get him were even shaking his hand in the industry events. He didn't beat the system. The system gave him a microphone and requested him to talk. And 40 years was the time we bent our heads in. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that one man was evil, but that we have created a world where beauty bewilders ability, and consistency is mixed with honesty, and where that man who never panics must be that man who knows. There was something that Bernie Madoff was better aware of than we were. He was aware of the fact that we would never scrutinize enough to discover that he knows nothing whatsoever.